The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Bosley. Alderman French. Present. Alderman Vaquero. Present. Alderman Cohn.
Present.
Carter. Present. Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Green. Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
We have 6 present. We have a quorum.
Would you please excuse Alderman Bosley, Coder, and Green?
What do we pay after?
We're here today to discuss the RFP for Prop S. As you know, we've been doing this annually, and so we're looking towards getting the RFP out for next year. The RFP was sent out, or a draft of it was sent out to committee members some time ago, and so we're really here to discuss it and see if there are any additional changes we want to make in it, or our thoughts and ideas. We also have, could you, I can't really see, can you come forward? Just in case.
Oh, Josh Kramer, Public Safety Director's Office.
Would you just briefly talk about some of the changes that are in this one and the thinking behind it?
Absolutely. RFP remains largely the same as it has been for several years. A couple of changes we did make for this year, general formatting changes, a couple of improvements to specify exact information that we require that the committee would benefit from in this year's proposals that are submitted. Regarding specific changes that are worth noting, if you go to what I believe is page 3 of the RFP under selection criteria, there was some discussion regarding specifying the type of services that we're most interested in on the part of the city and that the committee is most interested in seeing provided to the youth. Under number 2, a number of selection criteria have been added. Starts out with academic success, child safety, justice involved or at-risk youth, and employment life skills. Those are some areas in collaboration with Khatib Wahid, and also through just discussions with the chairman, vice chairman, and me in the mayor's office. We decided those are things that would be most useful to the youth. Those are areas we'd like to focus on. We think that there's a great benefit to services in those areas being provided to the youth. And please, of course, stop me if you have any questions about that. Number 3, we just added a little bit of verbiage to say we're really interested in collecting the data and reporting the data. We do have a certain amount of reporting that occurs now that's good. It provides us some clarity on what services are being provided, who they're being provided to, when they're being provided, so that we can go back and review that and understand which youth geographically, demographically are being provided services. So we just want to, we're asking applicants this year to provide us a little bit more information on how they're going to gather that data, how they're going to report it back, so that if we so choose to delve into it, utilize it, analyze it, how that we'll have that at our ready, and we'll be able to do that. And we also like to see how they arrive at their data. So we're just trying to get a more robust data set for the services that are provided. If you move to number 12, this is a new aspect, certainly, alignment with the City of St. Louis Peer Plan. There's an indication here that preference will be provided, or preference will be given to organizations that serve children and youth in the 15 target neighborhoods identified in the peer plan. Part of that discussion, I guess, is the reason for that is somewhat obvious, I guess, is that we're focusing on those 15 neighborhoods, and so certainly this would be a part of that effort. This is a separate, of course, pot of funding, but that's a priority for the city that we've identified, and so we're going to continue trying to focus on that, and we saw this as an opportunity to lend more resources to that effort. Number 13, utilization of city assets, specifically the rec centers, to establish an enduring connection to the community. The focus here is that the programs serve the youth. The goal is to try and connect the youth to their communities, whether it be their rec centers. We'd like to see that occur since we are investing in our rec centers. The board has seen fit to provide additional funding for those rec centers. We want the communities to be tied into those community assets. Those are the cores of their community, and we'd like to see programs, or I think the understanding is the goal is the committee would like to see programs utilize those assets that already exist, those physical structures, so that connection to the community is created, even if programs continue or don't continue or change, connecting those youth in with their communities. Number 14, seeking organizations that are committed to the communities they serve and ensuring programs can remain stable into the future. We certainly, I believe the committee has expressed an interest in seeing enduring programs that will last to serve the youth. And we'd like to avoid, I understand, one-off programs that may only succeed for a year or don't have the funding and the support to continue on into the future through their own fundraising efforts or otherwise. So this year the ask is that the organizations, I sort of lay out an informal vision of where they'd like to go over a number of years in hopes that the committee may be able to identify organizations that will continue on into the future through a couple of years of funding, and that will be able to serve the youth of the city outside of the funding provided via Prop S. So those are really the main changes. Everything else would almost certainly fall under general formatting changes. Nothing programmatic or large beyond that. So happy to answer any other questions.
Let's take any questions. I also want to point out that we do have in the audience Charles Bryson from CREA. You didn't have any comments, anything on this? Okay. All right. We can take any questions. We'll take it by seniority. Alderman French.
Thank you. I think, one of the things that we really worked on here was to try to make sure that, number one, that all the money actually goes towards it this year. As you know, in previous years, we have kind of tapped this fund to fill budget holes. So this year, we are talking about the full $1 million. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
950,000 would be allocated to organizations. So we're just under that, and there's a certain cutout for program oversight.
Okay. And so the other thing we wanted to do was make sure that this is kind of all leading into this kind of strategic plan that we have for the city to reduce violence. And so I think, as you mentioned, item 12 of the selection criteria is alignment with the city's peer plan, with preference given to those 15 target neighborhoods. I think that's going to be very important because, if we concentrate our efforts as a city in those 15 neighborhoods that represent the highest rate of violence, I think we're really going to see an impact versus spreading our efforts across the city and not focusing on where those actual murders are occurring. Now, we also talked about giving out grants that actually can make a difference as far as the size of the grant. Is there anything actually in the RFP to discussing like a minimum grant size, or is that something that we're just going to?
25,000.
Yeah, that would be a very large change that I failed to address, and that was after discussions with the chairman and vice chairman. We had proposed, or I should say, it was agreed upon that maybe a $25,000 floor for grant awards would be a wise decision, and that is based on sort of an understanding and realization based on past history of recipients that the grants that are smaller than that, while some do have an impact, I could name organizations that have done phenomenal things with grants smaller than that. The opportunities for a larger, more robust effective program probably exist when those grants are larger than 25,000. So that was a number, a floor that we chose that might be wise, and certainly with the larger amount of funding that is available, 950,000 this year. The goal was to maybe bolster the programs that are selected. And then I think we did also discuss a cap being put in there, but that's certainly, I'm not sure where the committee's at on that decision. The number 250,000 had been floated,
But
but,
that's not in here.
right.
It is, it say 200,000
Oh, we put 200, I apologize, yeah.
The cap is
on
in
the
there.
last page.
Okay, the proposal due date is the 31st of October.
I just put that on.
Okay.
Yeah,
So if they came in,
Yeah.
about how long would it take to review the applications, and when do you estimate funds would actually hit the street?
I'm sorry, how long would it take you to review them?
Yeah, how long was the review process last year?
Well, it was done for them to begin in January, in January of this year.
And how does it work? Is this reimbursable, so they expand and then get reimbursed, or do they receive money up front?
Correct, all funds are on a reimbursement basis. There's one provision for startup costs for their first month if they need to sort of establish themselves through any funding, then we allow them to do that, but everything else beyond that is basically on a receipt reimbursement basis.
Okay. And I think one discussion we might have had last year, maybe the previous year, was unspent previous funds. Is it possible to get a balance of whatever unspent previous year funds are still available, are still out there?
Yeah, regarding calendar year 2015?
Sure.
Sure.
Whatever the latest estimates you have.
I mean, currently spent to date for 2016, or?
I think based on our previous conversation, there was even some funds that were not spent from even years before the last fiscal year.
There was a certain amount of funding left over in calendar year 2015. Historically speaking, for the program, it was the smallest amount
Okay.
ever left over, so
About
to
how
speak. I think we ended up somewhere in the $40,000 to $50,000 range out of a total grant award of $866,000.
Okay. Is
So-
that still going to be spent, or can we put that back in this pot?
I don't know how those funds are being addressed through the comptroller, so I don't know. I mean, there's certainly an ordinance that governs the utilization of those funds, but as to how that's actually been done, I don't know.
So can you give us the accounting of what hasn't been spent? And then
Absolutely.
We'll go from there and figure out if it's still encumbered or if we can reallocate it.
Mhm.
All I have.
Completion? Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman Pacaro? No questions? Alderman Cone?
I just want to reiterate Alderman French's point about making sure that the selection criteria, fits in with the peer plan for the city and focusing on, the communities with the highest rates of violence in them. And also, the neighborhoods that have the highest density and highest concentration of youth where we can make a greater impact as well. So I'm glad to see that in the RFP, and I just hope that we kind of manage through the process, keeping those priorities in mind. Thanks.
Alderman Carter?
Yes. One small question, because Alderman French always steals my questions. So you said that it is a small percentage that they could give for, I guess, startup.
Mm-hmm.
What is that percentage, or what is that amount? Is it a cap on that amount?
We usually offer, it's offered that they can have first month startup costs. There's not a dollar amount associated with that, nor a percentage, so to speak. So it would generally be, in sort of a unreasonable or reasonable
Okay.
approach to it. I mean, if there's something that appears ridiculous, then that would not be approved as a startup cost, but certainly anything that is invoiced, We have receipts for recognizing that there are certain costs. And those startup costs, I think 2 organizations maybe last year asked for that. It's really not a frequent occurrence that people need that. And established organizations don't generally ask for anything as well, because this is additional funding to support programs that are already either new programs or currently funded programs, but in organizations that are currently operating. So that accounts for very little of anyone's budget really in a year.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, if I remember correctly, we had some discussion about the rubric by which we were evaluating the applications. Could you speak to that, and maybe any changes that will kind of change, the transparency involved in that, and maybe any changes this year?
I'd have to refer to the chairman, because I'm actually not involved in that aspect of it.
On evaluating them for
no,
funding, or evaluating their work afterwards?
Evaluating for awarding the funding. And last year, the applications were ranked. It was my understanding that they were ranked by
United Way.
exactly a rubric, and it was my understanding that your office was going to maybe ask for information about how that rubric was developed. I would have to go back, but that was my understanding, and I apologize if it was a misunderstanding, but I was a little unclear about how the rankings were done.
A report was generated from Public Safety reviewing how, from my understanding, how they performed in relationship to their presented goals and objectives that were in their proposal. Am I correct on?
I guess in the programs performing existing.
In the previous year.
Programs in 2015 that are
Right.
performed. Yeah, I did provide a relatively brief summary of how programs had performed relative to their contractual obligation to serve youth, funding reporting. But regarding the selection process, and I do know what you're referring to, but I don't have anything to do with the rubric
Okay.
or that metric. That was the chairman. However,
Right.
sir, if you allow me, I know that the United Way has assisted in some respects with some of the updates in those 4. I mentioned that we, under number 2 and under selection criteria, page 3, those categories were arrived at through some assistance from Khatib Wahid and SLPS, or he works for SLPS, I should say, as contractor, and then also with United Way. They have, I believe, provided some documents for the committee's use, the selection committee's use, regarding their priorities, their initiatives, and how they would rate proposals. But that is something for your use, certainly not anything you're bound by.
Okay. I think along with that, last year we discussed potentially having the applicants come before this committee. And so I just wanted to,
I wanted to make that a separate
sure,
discussion.
okay.
Right. I was going to bring it back up, because we did discuss that last.
Okay. And then I guess my last question about this particular RFP, the partnerships with the rec centers, number 13 here, I don't see the Recreation Commissioner here. Have we discussed this with her? And if you could speak to perhaps what the collaborative relationship might look like? In other words, have you spoken with the commissioner, the Recreation Commissioner, on partnering with the City of St. Louis Rec Centers?
No, we have not spoken with her about that. Those, I believe, are, the concept is built on certain organizations currently do work with our recreational facilities, and we don't have an established partnership on behalf of the program, but any organization that would seek to build that relationship and utilize those facilities, those facilities that are already there, would certainly be, under this RFP, viewed favorably.
Okay. To my knowledge, there isn't an organization that's working with the rec center in the Dutchtown Graveway Park area. And so in order to facilitate a relationship like this, a partnership, there may need to be an open house or some welcoming of organizations into the rec center, because as of right now, there's not an established, there's not an established relationship or to build off of. So I can connect with you on, after the meeting to perhaps make sure that this could be realized in the rec centers and in the Southside districts.
That, there might be something that we do, and we can talk about it further, that we speak with the director over there about doing citywide.
Sure, because if there's not I think especially in the Dutchtown Graveway Park area, that would be something that would be really, really beneficial. And the money that's spent would have much greater impact if it also included the rec centers. But without that established relationship already, I think it would be very hard for any of these organizations to envision coming into that space.
I do believe, if I could, I just had the pleasure of visiting with Gene Slay's Boys Club.
Sure, exactly.
And they actually do have programs. I believe they had 35 youth engaged over the course of the summer through one of our rec centers on the south side.
That's
and so that was a partnership they built on of their own accord, but that didn't. But that wasn't established or formalized or assisted on the part of the city. But they did reach out and created some of that on their own.
well, and that did not go very smoothly.
Ah, okay.
And so it was that specific project that I was thinking of when I was talking about maybe making that relationship and partnership work better and in the future.
And that's only one example of partnerships with the Marquette Rec Center in particular. There's others.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, I wanted to respond a little bit to your earlier question about what was used in the United Way's evaluation of them. They looked at, of course, what the proposal was saying in relationship to the RFP. They looked at what they tried to evaluate was the capacity of the organization. They did not really consider as heavily the area in which they were located. And so they would send back, based upon that criteria, what they're saying they want to provide, how many youth they are providing for, what was that dollar relationship, how much is spent per what they're saying. Their viewed capacity organization looking at their financials. And then they would rate them. They would not consider that the rating may be organizations who are based in an area where the need is not necessarily there. They just rated it based upon that criteria. And so that became the component that the subcommittee looked at to make its recommendation back to this one. So that was generally it. There was a request, is he back there, about the possibility of raising the age for us to look at. It's up to 24 now, but possibly raising it up to 26 to be able to encompass some other types of programming. Any thoughts and feelings about changing the age? It's in here from, what, 11 to 24 or something like that?
11 to 24.
Alderman Spencer?
From my perspective, unless there's a particular program that is excluded, while this is close to $1 million, it's actually just a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And it would be my significant preference to focus on younger, folks, the actual youth in our neighborhoods, and focus the money as best we can to a younger demographic and choice 15 neighborhoods, and really make an impact in a smaller subsegment rather than try to spread it across a larger geographical and age demographic.
Any other thoughts on?
I have to agree, and I believe when the voters passed this, it was targeted towards youth, and generally speaking, I think many people feel like that's either 18 and below, or 16 and below, or 21 and below, but I can understand where certain programs there's some crossover, and you want to make sure that there's follow-up and follow-through on the commitment to the young people. But I think when we start getting into the late 20s, I'm not too far removed from that age bracket myself, I'd like to think. And so, I'm getting further and further away from it as I spend more time down here at the Board of Aldermen. But, I just think that, to the Alderwoman from the 20th Ward's point, we do have a finite amount of resources. And to continue to broaden, how we spend those resources is going to dilute the impact that we have on those. And I speak as someone who, I'm actually trying to work with the health department on programs that are targeting 18 to 26-year-olds, particularly as it pertains to the sex trade and sex workers. And so, having more resources for that would be wonderful. But I'm just thinking in terms of this, funding source, the aldermen from the 21st and yourself, I'm sure, can attest to how difficult it's been trying to get up to $1 million in allegations in the last 8 years that I've been down here. So, I'm grateful that we even have the $950,000 to allocate this year. It would be very difficult for me to kind of rationalize why, we would want to expand the scope of the, program even further when we're fighting for the resources that we're allocating at the moment.
Any other thoughts? Alderman Vaccaro?
Just more of a question, and I should know the answer. In the past, part of that money's gone to drug court. Have they got different funding this year, or are they going to be looking for funding out of this again?
Your question is, did the drug court
Yeah,
other funding?
in the past, we've used some of
They
this to go to drug court,
Mm-hmm.
or part of the money's going to drug court. Is that also going to be in there this year?
Go right ahead.
So in the past, before it even got to us,
Right,
they
it
would,
went
they would
there.
allocate the money towards that. So they haven't done that this year. I don't expect them to apply, but if they do, the decision will be up to us.
Well, I mean, and the only reason I ask is because I'm sure that the offenders that go to drug court would be at a bigger age than 24 or 26. And if we're limiting the age, then we certainly limit some of the programs that could be helpful. I don't know. I mean, I agree that it's not a lot of money, but
I mean,
that's just a
I think
thought.
drug court did get funded in the budget through other means.
Okay, great. So, okay, that was just my question. I was just curious.
Did you have a comment? Okay. You're okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Did you want to speak to the possibility of raising the age? Please. Just to see what your thinking was about it.
Hey. So this past year, with the request that goes across the board, especially the minimums, if we raise that minimum to $25,000, we eliminate the possibilities of the small mom and pops that are they're buried inside of these neighborhoods, and they're helping 10 to 20 kids, almost like a daycare type of a scenario, where if we take that opportunity for them to give them $5,000 to $10,000, which is what they need in certain circumstances, to seed their opportunities to maybe make their programs greater, to get to a point where they can do a $25,000. If we start them, we'll eliminate that group because they'll be first timers to trying to develop their seeding programs. And one of the best examples I have is in Alderman Carter's ward with a woman who is a former Olympian who takes young females and takes them and teaches them discipline, in fact, built around sports. And as simple as their health and how to develop the disciplines that it takes to have mental strength to push themselves forward. We basically simply gave her $5,000. And what she did with that $5,000 is phenomenal. And it'll probably come up in the recaps that aren't due. You know, the money's not completed spending until December. So that $50,000 that you say is still on the table, it still has an opportunity to be spent. We're basically just going in fourth quarter. The age on that increase is an opportunity, and as well as working with the rec centers to develop reading and some work programs. It's horrible to say this, but we have 24-year-olds that can't read on a third grade level, and so to put them in we're trying to give them an opportunity to go into the rec centers and start in an OSHA training class so we can start developing their reading skills so we can get them jobs. I mean, you got these guys reading on second and third grade levels, which equals to an 11-year-old and even less. And so we still consider that a youth at risk, because it's delegating our neighborhoods to be driven up under, because that almost is a forgotten group. And so trying to send them to youth build and BUD programs, where when they get there, even though they try to adapt them to the apprenticeship programs, without them being able to read, they can't, we still eliminate a whole group of people by not being able to raise their level of what would be considered a fourth grade reading level. And so now we've completely turned our backs on this group from 18 to 24, but the 26. The 26 came from the opportunities from the unions to be able to work inside of the programs to start to help generate this reading skill, where they can ensure these people inside of these rec centers that we're trying to focus to develop them, to get them qualified so we can cover the work programs that are greatly and vastly needed in the NGA. And so from everything from computer literacy that we can put into the recreation centers to being able to learn how to read a little bit better for the OSHA level. Not that that's our responsibility, but if we keep pushing it on down the road to see who's going to take on this opportunity, then we're really not giving it a chance. Maxing out at 200,000 is far too great. Each program maximum at 100,000, and I think you started the 100,000, which was greatly needed. But to push it up to 200,000, and so then we would create a scenario where, like MERS, for example, excellent place, excellent, but they have 15 million. They start off with a win, but we still funnel money over to them, so to give them more money to help with the job programs that we have through the summer. When we have Slate doing the same thing, and there's opportunity for pools of money for them to have access to. So, but like, we need to focus on those 15 communities at a greater level, and 100,000 is a good number. We try to eliminate the fact of salaries being more than a certain percentage, and certain amounts. Once we see this year how these programs come in and how their spending is attached, we look at those spending. That's some of the criteria. Like, dude, you're asking for 100,000 and 60,000 of it is in salaries. So, the 100,000, when it's being applied strictly to the kids, it's for most of the time it's for summer programming. Throughout the year, maybe if they're doing a year's program where they're doing preschool and after-school programs, or bringing in, I'll tell you, for a perfect example, Talib Wahid. The cost of bringing in social analysts, now that's a good cost. These guys are professionals. They come in They start to work with kids inside of programs so we can start to build opportunity for wraparound services, which enhances their opportunities for education and just overall health conditions, because we have these people talking to that group from 11 to 18. So all of those things, I just wanted to be considered. You know, I think 200,000 is too high of a cap, and that all that does is push the groups to ask for more money with less services because they just know that that's the money. We've broken those numbers down on a number of occasions. They've asked for 100,000, saying that they're going to be recognizing kids from 5 to 12. Our area is from 11 to 12 under that certain contract. So if we break that contract down to relevance to just the 11 to 12-year-olds and give them 30,000, reducing that opportunity for them to raise salaries and things like that, which isn't our goal. Our goal isn't to create more funding for your salaries. It's to get more kids and get as much help into these communities as possible.
So if I understand you correctly, there are 3 points you have
Yes, sir.
for our consideration. You would want us to consider having a lower minimum amount.
Yeah, the minimums.
Then taking the age up to 26.
For-
And then having the cap at 100,000.
Leaving the cap at
Okay.
100.
Okay.
Not that those are just mandatory type of
Right.
things, but and when you go back and to check the records and how these people are spending these funds, and sometimes they're duplicating numbers, and sometimes they're passed through to get to another area that isn't even the area that we intended the money to be there for.
Okay.
So I just
Thank
wanted to
you.
bring up those points and making sure that when we meet after the RFPs go out, that you have a better consideration at the table, like you said, Alderwoman, to bring those groups in and let them speak upon themselves.
Okay.
And the last thing I wanted to repeat was a lot of times the criteria isn't met by the groups. Like their current tax returns, it's mandatory. And so we don't give them a second chance to kick their taxes back, you know, after they've presented. If your taxes weren't correct at that moment, or then you were disqualified. And so some of that has to be really reiterated when we're making that RFP, that if you don't have the current, what we're asking for, then your bid won't even be considered. I don't know if that's how it should be.
You had a response?
If I could, just to clarify, the organization that Marty's referred to, great organization, Throwing and Growing, the individual who runs that is Meryl Mency, former Olympian, wonderful woman. She was awarded $7,500, and her request was greater than that. She worked diligently to create a program within that $7,500 limit that would serve young ladies. So for clarity's sake, I believe her request was upwards of $20,000. It might have been $30,000. So in relation to a floor, her full program was actually at least that much money. And she would have much preferred to have provided a program that was fully funded so that she could serve the youth as provided in her proposal to you guys.
First year.
So.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything? Okay. Then at the point, or do we see the need to make any other additional changes in the RFP, or we're fine with leaving it as is?
Making the changes as far as what,
Yeah, if we, correct, either the changing the age, or the
I think-
cap amount, or the, what was that? Or the minimum amount.
I think that Maurice did touch some good points, just about the smaller organizations that are buried in these neighborhoods and these communities that serve minimal, and their program needs minimal. This would then take them out of these discussions. So I don't know how everyone else feels about lowering that 20,000, 25,000 back to, I guess, whatever we had it at before. It was at 0, or 1.
So,
I don't remember having a minimum. We had a maximum
but-
before. There was no minimum before there was a maximum, a cap.
Right.
Right. Would you suggest then taking out the minimum or
Yeah.
having a lower minimum?
I suggest having a lower minimum, at
lower
least
minimum.
5,000.
That would be, that's what I would think too.
If I could,
Yeah,
maybe
go right
enlighten-
ahead.
of 26 organizations, I believe only 5 were under $20,000. So that would put it in perspective, and that the other 20, I believe, 2021 were 20,000 or more. That's sort of your line of demarcation.
Mr. Chairman, if you allow.
Alderman French.
And, you know, what I'll also remind my committee members too is that very often when we gave out these smaller grants in the past, it was, as was mentioned, was not what these folks originally asked for. You know, they asked for more, and there was a feeling from past committee members to, let's just give them something if we can't give them the full amount. The problem, though, is that, you know, if somebody has put together a program and they put together a vision for this project, and it costs $50,000, if we just give them $10,000 or $5,000, it's not as if they can necessarily just, well, okay, I'll just serve a quarter of the kids. It actually changes the whole characteristics of the program. So there's a minimum amount in order, I think, for it to be successful. So even in the example that was given, she still wound up doing her program. She just had to find money from other sources to make it work. And so I think one way you can look at it is say, well, there's some organizations that can make an impact with $5,000. The other way to look at it, and I think an important way for us to look at it, is that if it is a worthy organization, what can they do with $50,000? You know, and so I think what we need to do is, this time around, be strategic in how we allocate this money, allocate it focusing on those 15 neighborhoods, which also, in addition to this money, are getting other additional services. So this money would act with those additional services in those 15 neighborhoods to have a greater impact, and to also do it in a way where either a small organization has an opportunity to serve you more kids with larger money, or for a larger organization to partner with the city through our recreation facilities, et cetera, to make a big impact. I wouldn't go small. I just think that the small is not reaching, it's not getting the impact. And I think now we're in, what year is this? So we've done this year 10 or I don't know how. You know, this time around, what we want to see is if we can focus our efforts and have a big impact. And I think that's where it comes in, is trying to have at least a minimal amount of support. And so again, but you know, if we still have an opportunity to judge the proposals on an individual basis when they come in, and you know, there may be, as was mentioned, those large organizations that have lots of other resources that come and ask for money, and we can judge that, you know, on its individual merit. But there also might be those medium-sized organizations that are asking for $100,000 or $200,000 a time that will actually be able to grow and serve even more kids in a meaningful way. So we still have an opportunity to do all this judging on an individual basis based upon the proposal that comes in. I wouldn't want to handicap ourselves, though, and with any more changes to this RFP right now. I think that the RFP is well written, and I think the way it's written now is written in our long-term strategic plan and what we're trying to do this time around.
Alderman Vaccaro, did you have any?
I mean, just a couple things.
Okay.
I really felt it should drop maybe down to 15. But then when Maurice was mentioning the BUD program, and that's probably something that seems important to me, is to get people jobs. If we're limiting ourselves at that age of 24, I do believe we should bring that age up if it means the difference of getting people in the BUD program. You know, with the NGA project coming up, there's going to be a lot of job opportunity, and if we can help people through reading programs and other programs that are a little bit older that would qualify for the BUD program, you know, I mean, when he mentioned that, that's certainly something that I think is important, is, you know, if we need to start getting jobs for they're not really youth anymore, but jobs for the young adults that, you know, if we can get them in the workforce, which is important. You know, so I think when we limit it to the 24-year-olds, you know, it just seems to me, I mean, I'm just going to give you what my thoughts are. I'm fine with whatever we do, but my thoughts are, I agree that going up to 26 may be helpful.
If I can, Joe, though.
Sure.
The, number one is that, keep in mind, this is not a lot of money, all right? So what we're talking about is still not a lot of money. Even at $100,000 or $200,000, we're only going to be able to give money to 5 to 10 organizations. Is BUD going to be one of those programs? I don't know. We haven't seen the applications. We haven't seen the proposals. Maybe BUD is. But if BUD is one of the proposals, even if we focus exclusively on one age group, say just 20-year-olds, this money isn't going to go very far. You know, if you gave them $100,000 just to service 20-year-olds in the city of St. Louis, not 19, not 21, there is enough 20-year-olds to completely exhaust whatever money we would give.
Right, and I don't disagree, and I would hope that the unions fund a lot of this themselves.
I hope so.
You know, I think they will, because there's an importance, and because we've raised the minimum amount of minority participation on the job. We're asking for that to come from the city. I think, you know, even if we only give them the 25,000, I still think when we say you got to be under the age of 24 for us to help you, I think that, you know, like you said, we're going to evaluate each group as it comes in. So even if we raise it to 26.
But I guess the point is that it doesn't mean that if we were to fund the BUD program, all right, I would imagine their budget would be much more, the total budget would be much more than just the 100,000 they would get.
Right.
So maybe that 100,000 is just used for kids up to 24, and then their other funding is used for the kids over that. Again, I don't think this is, you know, it's little money.
No, I don't disagree, but I think it,
increase the boundaries and increase the age groups and lower the amounts, then you're starting to spread it out so thin that you can't really make an impact.
but we're the group that's going to make the decision at the end of it anyway.
Correct.
So if we say it's 26, and most of the programs that come in are geared to 12-year-olds, we're going to be the ones that determine that. And I don't think we should handicap, and I'm fine with the 25, but I hate to handicap the BUD program, because they come in and you know, they got people that are 26 years old, and we agree that that's a good program at whatever amount, then we fund it. If we don't agree, you know, I mean, we're the ones that we can actually pick and choose the group, so we're limiting ourselves. We're not really limiting. We limit ourselves when we say groups under this age, you know, and then we start limiting what they're doing. If we say, well, you can only use this money, so we want some accountability that says anybody over the age of 24, we don't have to fund. We can make the age 26. The majority of the programs we fund could be under the age of 10.
We
You
have
know,
Alderman Cohen that also wants to make some.
okay.
Yeah, so
Alderman Cohen.
this is one of those times that the alderman from the 21st Ward and myself agree. You know, it happens more often than people think. But so, you know, I think that, you know, first of all, we don't know if the BUD program is an applicant for the funding. It's great if they are. You know, certainly would, you know, love to see more job training for young people. But, you know, if we keep the age requirements in place, it doesn't mean that they can't be an applicant, and it doesn't mean that they can't receive funding, and it doesn't mean that they can't, you know, train young people and continue to move that program forward. They can do all of those things and still have successful outcomes, even if we keep the age cap where it is and still focus on youth at risk, which is the whole reason the public passed this in the first place. And so I think that by increasing the age limits, we're getting into some really foggy, you know, situations in terms of, you know, what are we spending this money on? And so, you know, like I said earlier, I think some people would argue that even 24 is probably a little bit on the high end in terms of focusing on youth. You know, most people, when they hear youth, they're thinking under 21, under 18, under 16. And I understand that we're the deliberative body. We are the ones that make that decision. But I think we also have expectations that we have to set with people when we issue RFPs. and, you know, live up to the expectation of our constituents that voted for these funds in the first place. And so I think keeping the age limit at 24 is appropriate. And I think also, you know, having the minimum in place helps us through that deliberative process as well. You know, I think it's been mentioned a couple times already, you know, the one program that we're talking about that, you know, received, you know, the $7,500 that, you know, everyone really loves, they actually applied for more than $20,000. And so we were the ones that ended up giving them, you know, lesser funds because, you know, we wanted to make sure that they, you know, were included in the grant. And so I think we need to bear in mind that the folks who have applied have generally been applying and responding to the RFP, you know, within accordance to the guidelines that are here in this RFP. And so this RFP makes sense to me, and I think, you know, by changing this going forward, it's only going to push back our time frame and getting these funds out to the public and actually helping our constituency. And so I like the way the RFP is written. I think it does a good job at focusing on our priorities for funding. I think too, you know, just as a concern, you know, and I know we've talked about this pretty much every year. I've been involved in the deliberative process on it, but making sure that, you know, we include either in the RFP or in the conversations once we have the respondents in place, you know, if you were to receive less funds, would you be able to operate your program? You know, even if that's a $100,000 application or a $50,000 application or a $25,000 application, you know, knowing, you know, if they were to receive, you know, less than the grant amount, you know, if they would be able to continue with the program is going to be important. And I know that we've done that in the past, but I just want to reiterate that now. But I do think that this RFP does a good job of exemplifying the priorities that we have for funding.
Alderman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to speak against the minimum. I think we all remember the one organization that was maybe talked about because of its name, Pianos for People, last year, who was awarded $15,000. And with that award of $15,000, they did an incredible amount of work. They were able to hire a bilingual piano teacher who did a lot of outreach into the neighborhood and worked with the youth in the surrounding Gravois Park, Dutchtown neighborhoods that they would not have been able to do. And they did apply for that amount. They were awarded it. It was less than $25,000, and it still had a major impact in our community.
You have a response?
Now, they would probably be willing to apply for $25,000. And they could, yes, I suppose they could have, but in the case that was what they were looking for, I just simply wanted to state that was, you know, a situation in which an amount less than the proposed minimum was granted, asked for, and made a major impact.
So if I understand you correctly, you would say then not have a minimum in the RFP at all?
I would say not have a minimum, yes, but I do agree that the $7,500 that was awarded in response to a request of $20,000 is going to be a difficult thing to make. If you've applied for $20,000 and you've made a plan for that and you're awarded a significantly less figure, you're going to have to that is something I think we as a committee should steer away from doing. Either award what's being requested and fulfilling the goals that are outlined in the application or not. But trying to reestablish an organization's budget, you know, is something that is beyond what we should be doing.
You have a, do you have something, Alderman?
Yeah, and you know, the last point I just want to make is that I think the way the RFP is drafted right now, it really emphasizes what we're trying to focus on. Number one, by having a minimum, it encourages applicants to think big. Right? What we're trying to do is have a major impact. So if you're like what people, pianos for people, then this is an opportunity for you to reapply, but think bigger. Think about how can you affect more kids? What could you do with more funds? If you were very successful in the past, We appreciate what you did, and we're willing to reinvest to have a larger impact. The other thing it does is also encourage to focus on those 15 neighborhoods, which I think is a priority for the city, and encourages using our existing facilities. So we have facilities. We need more programming in these facilities. City taxpayers already invest in keeping these buildings open. This is another opportunity to fund another organization to help use that space. And I think those three things will allow us to have a major impact. And I think the RFP as is written reflects that, and I think it encourages the applicants to think strategically in those terms.
Alderman Porter and then Ms. Nix.
And this is also a greater chance for piano peoples for piano, for them not to be funded, because we are also doubling the maximum amount that they can get. And as we've seen in the past, we give a few organizations the maximum regardless of what else we are trying to fund. So at the end of the day, it's minimal money. We have doubled the maximum amount that folks would be able to get, and so I don't see it as us trying to help the smaller organizations like I'm sorry if I keep messing up the name. People for Pianos, Piano for People. I think it's going to go the quite opposite. You know, where our larger, more popular organizations may be able to access this 200,000.
Yeah,
If I could, just to put it in perspective, very few, if any, and I mean very few, organizations apply for anything less than 25,000. In the case of Pianists for People, that was actually the organization I was alluding to when I said a great example of someone who did an amazing job with a very small amount of money. Their proposals have requested upwards of 30,000 over the last 2 years. So they have sought greater funding and have, again, similar to Throwing and Growing, they have worked diligently to refashion their programs in a way that they can still support the programs they intended and the youth that they wanted to serve, and they've maximized the number of youth at the expense of risking staff salaries and otherwise to ensure they can get the most youth in. Pianists for People in particular have exceeded the number of youth that they've served through their programs despite the funding. They haven't come back and asked for additional money in that respect. So organizations like that, almost completely across the board, have asked for more funding, have worked very hard to fit their programs underneath the budgets that they've been offered graciously by the board. So that, just to put it in perspective there, the discussion, there aren't really many folks asking for less than 20 to 25.
And I greatly appreciate that perspective. The hesitation I have in doubling the maximum and increasing the minimum is that we're going to reduce the overall number of organizations that we're going to fund, and I would hate to see one of our small guys like Pianos for People who may have asked for more and would certainly benefit by the 25,000 be cut out because we've simply shrunk the number of recipients by increasing the award sizes. And so,
and to put that number historically, programs started out, Prop S started out very small. Over the last couple of years, this year at 26, prior it was 15 or 16. I think the year prior to that was about 15. So we did, last year was, we jumped from 14, calendar year 14, from 635,000 to calendar year 15, 866,000. We went from I'm sorry, I'm misstating that. Calendar year 16, which we're currently operating under those funds, is 866,000. We have 26. Last year we had 635. We had about 15. The prior year we had 635. We had about 15, give or take one. So as the budget's grown, we kind of, the committee has seen fit to fund a larger percentage relative to the percentage in budget increase. So again, we have another budget increase, and if I could go so far as to also say, if you took out the top 3 organizations maybe that were funded, largest 3 awards, you would still have a larger amount of funding left over than would be covered by the remaining applicants. So the committee's already seen fit to fund a number of organizations at a large amount. Even when removing those, you still have a very large amount of funds available to fund the remaining number. more funding than you would have utilized in the current fiscal year.
Okay. Did you have something?
Sure.
Because I was going to see if we can move to finalizing it.
All right.
That's a hint, but if it's significant, go ahead.
Well, so I would just, in response to Alderwoman Spencer's comments, the number of organizations, if we increase the amount of minimal and increase the amount of maximum, it does pose a possibility that we will fund less organizations. And one way to look at this, and this is the way some folks have looked at it in the past, is let's fund as many organizations as possible. I would offer that another way to look at it is let's serve as many people as possible. And it's possible to fund less organizations and serve more people. And I think in the past we've had, as was just mentioned, smaller pot, and we have split it, divided it by more organizations, and we have not seen collectively the impact that I think we want to see. Now, there have been some organizations that have had great success, and there's been some, frankly, that, you know, we basically have subsidized their normal operations. We haven't had any, you know, new results from it. And to Alderman Carter's point about, you know, these large organizations that come in, and many of the same names, big names, get funded often. I mean, that's up to us. And so I think we just need to be, as a committee, as individuals, we need to be focused on what we're trying to do with this pot of money this time around. And maybe some of the big guys who've gotten funded in the past don't get funded this time. Right. That's going to be on us.
Okay. Are there any motions to make any changes on the draft? And I think we had a healthy discussion.
Well,
so,
I would ask a question. If we make a motion to change the funding, is it going to delay the process? I know that Alderman French brought up it would delay the process. But if we make that motion to make those changes now.
No, that's just changing this RFP.
Right, to change it. So if we change that down
It
to 100,000 and we change the minimum down to
No, it wouldn't slow anything
15,
down.
would that?
It would not delay the process, because then the next thing would be to ask us to adopt this RFP so it can go out.
Well, then I would motion to make that change down to 15 and 100.
Second.
So the motion before us is to change the minimum to 15,000 and the maximum to 100,000.
100, yeah, that's just my motion. If it
And
goes somewhere
we have the
great.
motion, we have a second, we can go for it. Any discussion on the motion?
All right, so,
Sure.
so while I disagree with changing the minimum, I strongly disagree with changing the maximum. Because if there is an organization that is doing good things, I don't think we should limit ourselves the opportunity to actually go all in and actually fund it.
So I'll change my motion.
Change your motion?
I'll change my motion,
To what
if you get to take your second away, but,
Yeah, I'll take that second.
and I'll change that motion just to move the minimum down
To 15.
to 15 and leave the maximum where it's at.
So you've removed your second, but you're seconding this?
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is simply to take the minimum down to 15. That's what we're discussing. Any discussion on that? Okay. There's no discussion. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman French?
No.
Alderman Vaquero?
Aye.
Alderman Cohen?
No.
Alderman Carter?
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Aye.
I'll go with
Chairman Kennedy?
aye.
We have 4 ayes and 2 noes.
Okay.
The motion is carried.
Are there any, by your motion, we've adopted, by your vote, we've adopted the motion. Did you have that does it?
Well, no, I'll leave the other one alone. I almost do want to bring it up to 26, but I'll leave that one alone.
Okay, if there's no other motions, then we'll entertain a motion to adopt the RFP.
Move that we adopt the RFP. Second.
Second.
Been
Previous
moved
roll.
and seconded that we adopt the RFP as amended. A request for previous roll, objection to previous roll.
I would object to that.
I object. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman French?
Aye.
Alderman Vaquero?
Aye.
Alderman Cohen?
Aye.
Alderman Carter?
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Aye.
Chairman Kennedy.
Aye.
We have 6 ayes and 0 noes.
By your vote, we've adopted the amended RFP, and it can go out. It was a little bit of my hope today to have a discussion about some of the issues that were raised, how we'd like to see the process go this year. I think I'll schedule another meeting so we can have that discussion. I would just, yes.
I just know I had talked to United Way, and they were happy to come. If you ever wanted them to come talk about their process.
Right. Okay, then. Okay, we could do that, but I wanted us to have an opportunity as a committee. I was here when we came up with this idea, and the idea was to try to do some things on the front end to help eliminate and reduce crime in the creation of these dollars. The first time we did it, we had the whole $1 million, but we didn't have any staff to assist, and the committee itself took on that full responsibility, the Public Safety Committee, and we finally were able to get some dollars out onto the street. Then we received a opinion from the City Councilor's office that we needed to create what's called a Professional Services Committee, and that there's ordinances that govern that. So the next year, we went that route. Then we received a second opinion from the City Councilor's office saying we didn't have to go that way. So what I will do is to put some outline as to how we've gotten to this place here and know a little bit of the history and the background and some of the experiences that the committee has had. You know, here as a board, we don't have this kind of organized institutional historical archives to go to. And so those of us that were here, I'll try to put that together so that you have that background. I am the historical archive is what the alderman from the 21st says, yes. I am at this point. You call me up all the time, and I try to tell you as much as I know. But so we've adopted this. We'll have another discussion about the process and any new ideas toward the process. Okay? I think we had a good discussion. There's no other items on the agenda. With that, our meeting's adjourned. Thank you.